בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב. Our hero for today is Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog. And as I was preparing this shiur, I realized that there is no way that we would be able to cover such a great person, such a great man, with such a large scope of Torah and halacha and the issues he dealt with throughout the journey of his life. And we would have to split it to two meetings. So I hope today to speak about his biography, and we would not delve deeply into his halachic positions on the different matters that he dealt with. Some of them are extremely interesting and relevant. And then in the next meeting we'd have about him, we'd delve into really the halachic issues. But there is another thought I am playing me with, and that is that next week we'll do something for Pesach. So maybe our second meeting about Rav Herzog would be delayed to to after Pesach. To after Pesach. Shavuot is a different sore point because it seems that I'm going to Miluim on May for 82 days. So, yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. But that's just as an introduction. So don't worry that I'm not giving sheets and that we are not reading from his Torah inside as usually I like to do, because I do plan to have a whole session that would be devoted to his Torah. So we begin with speaking about his biography. So again, Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog. He was born at 1888 in Lumja in Poland. Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, so it was a very vibrant and beautiful Jewish community. There was a big yeshiva in Lumje. His father, Rav Herzog, was also a Rav, so he's coming from a rabbinical family. His father was not only a Rav, but he was also a member and an activist in Chovevei Tzion, in the movement for the establishment of Eretz Israel. Later, he became part of the Zionist movement. He was even invited by Herzl. He didn't meet Herzl in person, but Herzl heard about the young, promising rabbi, so he sent him a ticket to become a member in the Congress, in the Zionist Congress. However, Rav Yoel became sick, just fell sick when the Congress was supposed to be held, and so he missed the opportunity to participate. And Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog is being raised in this home of Torah and mitzvot and leadership on one hand, and also a strong Zionist affiliation on the other hand. They say that his genius was revealed when at the age of 6, he went with his father to the Beit Midrash, and there was a big drasha that was given by one of the darshanim that were going around in these cities. And the young child, after he saw the darshan giving it the whole spiel, the whole drasha, then the young child stood, he took a bucket and he put it upside down. He stood on the bucket and he mimicked the darshan. So that's many children do. But he also was able to repeat the whole drasha from beginning to end. And then they understood that they have here something which is really special. Of course, he's being taught by his father and other melamdim in the town. 9 years later, when Rav Yitzchak Isaac is not a Rav yet, but Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog is around 9 years old, the family moves. The father is looking for a rabbinical position. They move for a very short time to the United States, to Massachusetts, to a city named Worcester. Yeah, okay, so I have no meaning. I'm just reading from his Worcester. That's the how they Worcester. I have no idea how they pronounce it. I am using his biography. Never been there. So, but I have no idea. It seems that something didn't work out because I looked at two different biographies, and in both of them there are no details. They just say that they were there for a few months and they left. So I guess something didn't work out because you're not going all the way west to the United States just to return after a few months. And you remember, this is before planes. That is a very long journey in a ship. So I guess something really didn't work out, and his father returns, and this time to Leeds in England. So they moved to Leeds in England. It was not a big Jewish community. It was a rather small but very lively Jewish community in Leeds. And his father, Rav Herzog, becomes the chief rabbi of Leeds. Now, Yitzchak Isaac, the young Yitzchak Isaac, continues to grow in Torah. However, there are not so much Torah institutions and rabbis in Leeds of the time. I hesitate to say about now. So I don't want to, to put anyone to shame. Yeah, hardly anyone left. Okay, so he's looking for someone to speak with in Torah. He's learning with his father, but he wants to speak with other people as well. So he begins to write letters to Rabbanim all over Europe. And because he's humble, he doesn't write, also he's 12 years old, so he doesn't write his name. He is just writing back and forth without telling his real name. And some of them answer. His father published some of these correspondence in one of his books as an appendix, the correspondences of his son. And that's so that's also very interesting. Some of the Rabbanim that he was exchanging letters with found that very interesting. Who is this mysterious genius that is writing back and forth? And some of them made the effort to look at the stample from the post to understand. And, after you see that the letter comes from Leeds in England, it doesn't require a detective to understand that you are speaking with either the Rav or someone from the family. And so some of these very distinguished Rabbanim, Reb Simcha Meir HaKohen Dvinks is one of them, and also the Ridvaz, Rabbi Yaakov David Ben Ze'ev Vilovsky. So his name, I guess that nowadays doesn't say too much to us, but he wrote a few very important pirushim on the Yerushalmi. He was in Slotsk when he was exchanging these letters with our hero, but he later moved to Tzfat in Eretz Israel, and he was one of the Bari Plukta, the people that were in dispute with Rav Kook over how to behave or how to accept or not accept the Chalutzim and the secular Zionists in Eretz Israel. So also a very interesting figure. And in 1910, when he was, so if he was born in 1888, so in 1910 he's 22. So in 22, these Rabbanim that he was exchanging letters with, the Ridvaz even came to England, they gave him ordination. So they ordained him to Rabbanut. So now he is a Rav. However, he does not only learn his Torah, but sitting there in Leeds, he also begins to learn secular studies. And in 1912, 2 years after he was ordained as a rabbi, he receives his MA from London University, which used to be a very important, maybe still is, a very important name. So he gets his MA in Semitic languages and classical languages. And in the same year, 1912, his father, Rav Yoel, now continues from Leeds. He is being asked to become the rabbi of Paris in France. Now, that's a very complicated position. In France, there is the Jewish French community, which are, we would say today, very much to the left. Also, there are in French Eastern Juden who came, so we are in the end of the 19th century. So there is already a massive influx of Jews coming from the East, from Russia, from Poland, where it's very, very difficult economically, and they begin to come to the West, basically looking for Parnassa. But as they come to the West, they are now being faced with challenges that they didn't face back in the East to the religious identity, such as secular studies, such as suddenly they have, I wouldn't say equal rights, but something that begins to resemble equal rights. And then the question begins, do you remain Jew? And these people are now in Paris, many people of this origin are now in Paris, and they are looking for a Rav that would be able, I would say, to bridge for them the world they came from and the world that they have now landed in. And who is better equipped to build this bridge than a person that embodies this movement of coming from Lomge to London, to Leeds, and then getting his MA from London University. So they accept him. They ask him, excuse me, I confused. We are speaking about his father now, not about Rav Yitzchak Isaac himself. But of course, his father also that made the move from Lomge to Leeds is a person that he would be able, and sent his son to learn in university. He is a person to be able to bridge for them this gap. Now, this is, although Leeds itself was not very strong Torah-wise, Paris was even weaker. We are speaking about people that many times had very limited knowledge of Torah and halacha, and very limited practice of Torah and halacha. And we may say that to a large extent, the position there was a position of what we would call today Keruv, outreach. Now, this term did not exist back then. But basically, much of what they were doing there, the family now, was trying to get Jews that began to drift away from tradition, get them back in. And it was a very difficult war because it was against the tide. Nowadays, not that nowadays it's easy, but it is more, there is a different wave in the world nowadays regarding religion. However, back then, I think I don't have to say that it's very well known in the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. So it seemed that all religions, not only the Jewish one, also the Christian, all religions are on their sure way to be extinct. And trying to get the Jews in Paris, no less, that they would come to Paris and there they would get closer to their Father in heaven, that was fighting an uphill battle. Not a simple one. He made his successes, and obviously not everything was successful, but that is the house that Yitzchak Isaac Halevi lives now in. He continues his Torah learning, but also his secular learning. He gets another MA from the Sorbonne in Paris, and then he begins to write a doctorate on the Tchelet. Now, what is the Tchelet? The Tchelet, he called the doctorate in English, it was called Hebrew Porphyrology. Porphyrology. So he coined the term. How do you say Tchelet? Light blue? I don't know. Okay. So the Tchelet is the type of dye, of color that was on the tzitzit. And also we read in our parshot now, in the Bgadim, the cloth of the Kohanim, of the Kohen Gadol, Me'il Tchelet. So the Tchelet is the type of color they would use to dye tzemer, wool. Now the problem was that we do not know what exactly is the color, because we can speak about light blue, but we can all understand, at least the women of us can understand that there are many types of light blue. And also, further than that, how exactly was this color produced? The Gemara speaks about a certain fish or a marine creature that was used in order to produce the light blue. However, the knowledge of what exactly is this creature and what was the procedure to extract this light blue dye, this was something that was long lost, more than 1,000 years. So Rav Herzog is dedicating his PhD to try and understand what is this creature that was used in order to extract this specific color, and what exactly is this color, what is the procedure. And in order to do that, he applies both his very deep and encompassing rabbinical knowledge, because he needs to get any source he can put his hands on. For 1,000 years, no one speaks about tchel because no one knows. So he's going very much deep into the rabbinical sources to see what type of echoes we have of this ancient technology of extracting this specific color. But on the other hand, he has to apply all of his knowledge in the secular studies, because he begins to look at Greek sources, Latin sources. He learns chemistry. He learns marine biology. And he comes to the conclusion that there is a specific marine creature. Nowadays, the people that go nowadays with Tchelet, while they use this work, they do not usually use the same creature that he spoke about. So there was some change that is much beyond our scope to speak about, and also beyond my knowledge of marine zoology to speak about this creature. There is a lot that was written about in the last 20, 30 years, but he is one of the people that gave a great push to this race to rediscover the lost tchelet. Now, this work, in many ways, he did as a very young man. He got his doctorate from the London University. He went back to London in order to write it in English, and he received the doctorate in the age of 25. So that was a very big deal back then. I don't know, now, again, I'm not familiar enough how many people get their doctorates at the age of 25. I think even nowadays, that is pretty rare. Yeah, 25. Very good. So, okay. Everything between a couple is shared. But I think it was pretty rare also back then. I think also now it made splash that he got his doctorate in 25. But although he was a young man, this doctorate to a large degree, I think, represents much of the personality of Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog that would accompany him for many, many years into the future. And that is, we spoke about the very deep analytical and encompassing Torah knowledge. Also, his strong interest and ability in the secular knowledge and the ability to combine them in ways that there are people that have strong Torah knowledge and strong secular knowledge. But it is a completely other level to be able to combine them into one project. And he's able to do that. But also beyond that, why does he speak about Tchelet? Tchelet is a dream. It's something from the past. It speaks to the revival of the Jewish nation. You remember that his father is an activist, a Zionist activist. His father becomes a member and also a founding of Mizrahi movement in England. He's part of the founding of the Mizrahi movement in England. So he is being raised in a house in which they speak about the Jewish revival. And part of this revival is the revival of the Torah in all of its dimensions. So that would be Tchelet. It would be coming back to the land, the ancient homeland. It is recombining real life with Torah. Torah is not only something that you learn in the Beit Midrash and then you go outside and the outside is completely divorced of Torah because it is in the hands of the non-Jews. If we are reviving our nation in our homeland, we need to remarry the Torah into the practical reality. So you must not only limit yourself to learn the ideal Torah, but also to understand the practical reality that would consist of what we would call today secular studies. He is a dreamer, speaking about Chelet, but a very realist one. He's not speaking about his dreams in some, he's not giving drashot, sermons about Chelet. He's doing that also. But he is interested in realizing the dream. So he is, I would say, a realist dreamer, or maybe a dreaming realist. And that is, I think, a fitting title to his persona, and all of that is embodied in this work that he did in such a young age for his doctorate for the University of London. By the way, the whole thing can be downloaded for free. The doctorate in his it was written in a typewriter, but it's so interesting. So it's written in a typewriter. I went through it, not that I didn't read the whole thing, but just to see, to get the spirit. You can Google it, and uh, every time that he had to write in Greek, because he is quoting long quotations from Aristotle, for example, because Aristotle also speaks about purple, and there is a connection in the royal purple and the biblical blue. That's part of his strong argument. So he doesn't have in his typewriter, there are no Greek letters. It's not like our computers that you can just change language. So every time he comes to Greek, he has to write it in his own handwriting. It's just so interesting to see that you can download the whole thing, and even if you don't want to read it, just I don't know, for me, at least, I don't know if you would share this excitement, but for me, just seeing that, seeing this handwriting, seeing the work that he invested into that, for me, that's inspiring. It's inspiring. So that's, as I said, that's in 1914, as he's 25. He continues to learn. He also is learning what we would call today the human learnings. He's learning mishpatim, law. He's becoming an expert in law. He would later write an English book that is now reprinted in a new edition called The Main Institution of Jewish Law, in which he is going and he's making an analytical comparison between the English common law and some of the basic institutions of halacha. Again, that's a very wide mind. He is already preparing himself, of course, as you can understand, to the establishment of a Jewish state. So if we want to be able to act upon our Torah, we need to begin to revitalize areas of Torah that were dormant, that's the word, dormant, for 2,000 years, for millennia. And how do you do that? So he says the most close thing to halacha is the common law, right? Because it's something that is an organic growth. It's not something that a parliament sits and gives laws. It's something that goes from down up, which is like halacha that for the last 2,000 years we didn't have Sanhedrin, so it was not dictated from up down. It's something that includes minhagim, includes other takanot of local batei dinim, and now everything should be incorporated. So he says if we would look at the English common law, maybe we can have some beginnings of how to do that. Very interesting. Very interesting. Again, a dreamer, but he's coming to his dreams with very real tools in order to try to achieve them. We'll see how that would continue throughout his life. In 1915, he is being appointed as the Rav. He's still single, by the way. That's very interesting. It's not so common. So he was appointed as a Rav in 1915 of Belfast in North Ireland. Now, you don't have to be an expert in the history of England and Ireland in order to know that these are very, very, very turbulent years in the British Island of the time. So he's becoming the Rav there. He is he's trying to walk between the sides. I would speak later. He would make a more committing step. But as for now, his main issue is the Jewish community, and he's working with them. In 1917, he establishes the Mizrahi in Ireland. Also, as you can understand, again, he continues the work of his father. In 1917, of course, we are in the First World War. And Rav Kook, if you remember, is also stuck in England because Rav Kook went to the Agudat Israel convention, and when the war broke out, he couldn't return to Israel because everything was closed. So Rav Kook receives a position in Machazikei Hadat in London, in the Shul Machazikei Hadat. And now they are both in England. And there is a convention in 1917 of the rabbis in England, and they discuss should they allow eating kitniot at Pesach. Because of the war, there was a shortage in food supply, and not necessarily you'd have enough matzah for the whole Chag for everyone. So can you allow eating of kitniot? Now, they discussed that. He would use that again. The same discussion would be raised again in the first years after the establishment of the state. It was the Hatzena, the ration, right? That's the years of ration. That was what told my father, Zichrono Livracha, that the Rabbanim HaRashiim, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog was the Rav Rashi when the state was founded. For a year or two, when it was extremely difficult here, they allowed the Ashkenazim to eat kitniot. The family of my father didn't use his hater, but the hater was given. So that is again a very interesting thread that goes through his life. However, not less interesting and important of the kitniot, which I know that we are all interested in, but a part of the question of kitniot, the convention was held at the home of a rabbi named Rav Hillman. After the convention ended, the distinguished rabbis remained and were served tea and cookies. The server of the tea and cookies was the young daughter of Rabbi Hillman. As you can understand, in a few months, there was a wedding between Rav Herzog and Sarah Hillman, who became Sarah Herzog, an extremely important figure throughout his life. She would become, by the way, maybe I should have said it as we opened. Rav Herzog and his wife, Rabbanit Sarah Herzog, were both declared as the mofet figures, as the model figures for the Chinuch Dati this year, Tafshin Pei. And she helped him throughout all of his life. She accompanied him everywhere that he went, and she also kept a personal diary, which is very helpful for us today in order to understand what he was going through. So they were married throughout his life, over 40 years. So that is his marriage in 1917. In 1918, he's being asked to move from Belfast to Dublin. And he can no longer avoid making a decision in the war, basically a war between the Irish and the English over the question of the independence of Ireland. And Rav Herzog decides that he stands to the side of the people who strive for self-rule, הגדרה עצמית. Self-determination. Yeah, for the people that stood for self-determination. And you cannot but acknowledge, of course, his strong connection with the Jewish war for their own independence and for their own self-determination. So that's not a simple choice, by the way, because that many of the Irish were Catholics and not necessarily in favor of the Jews. And I am trying to be gentle. But he made this on ideological grounds, that he would be in favor of the Irish. he even let one of their great leaders, his name was, I don't butcher it too much. I mean, it's enough what I'm doing to English. What do I do with Irish? So, Aimon de Valire. Aimon de Valera. I see that his name is not necessarily a household name, but he was a very, yeah, you knew him?
Probably Gaelic, probably the Irish language.
I guess I'm on the Valera. Yeah, so that was his name. He was one of the leaders, and Rav Herzog let him made his gatherings in his own home because the British would never look for him in the house of the local rabbi. So that was a very courageous step because that would, if he would be found out that he's letting the rebellion, the conciliations to be made in his own home, of course, he would be in a grave danger. And the Valera remembered it and would later help Rav Herzog when the Jewish state would need help. It didn't help in the time of the Holocaust, as Rav Herzog hoped that he would help, but that's we would speak about that, I hope, in a few more minutes. So that's the Valera. And you so appreciated him, the Valera, that in 1937, I'm skipping a little ahead, in 1937, he would ask Rav Herzog to become part of the committee to write the new chukah, the constitution of the independent Irish state. So Rav Herzog would become part of that, a very minor part, but he would become part of that because of his knowledge in law and his wisdom and his courageous stand in favor of the rebellion. Okay. He also, two sons are being born to Sarah and Rav Yitzchak Isaac. His sons are called Chaim and Yaakov. Chaim after Reb Chaim of Brisk, and Yaakov after the Ritvaz that we spoke was one of the rabbis of Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog. We'll speak about these two sons because both of them would become very important in the Jewish state. Yeah, okay, so I think that as we all know, his grandson would become the current president of the Jewish state, but also Chaim Herzog, his son, was also the president. He was the sixth president. So a very chashuv family, very important family. Okay, in 1935, we are now skipping much forward. But it's because we have a very large portion of the story still ahead of us. So in 1935, Rav Yoel Herzog, is the father of our hero, passes in Paris, and Rav Herzog decides to bury him not in Paris, but to take him to Eretz Israel and to bury him in Eretz Israel. And that is his first visit in Eretz Israel for 6 weeks. He is in Eretz Israel with his wife. He visits Rav Kook just a very short time before Rav Kook's passing. Rav Kook is very impressed by the young Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, and because the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv just passed away, he is asking Rav Herzog, can maybe he make aliyah and accept upon himself the rabbanut of Tel Aviv. He also meets with other people, makes some connections, and returns to Ireland. A few months later, Rav Kook himself passes away, and now he's being asked not to become the Rav of Tel Aviv, but to become the chief rabbi of mandatory Palestine, of Eretz Israel. Now, that's a somewhat complicated story because politics are complicated. And his rival, I would try to make it short, his rival was Rav Harlap, who was a student and a friend of Rav Kook. Rav Harlap was born in Yerushalayim and never went out of the boundaries of Eretz Israel. So he is a Yerushalmi. He never learned in any university. He is accepted by the Yerushalmim, by the Hayishuv Hayashan, by the old establishment, we may say, of the religious. And they are very worried with Rav Herzog, who is a doctor and is coming from Western Europe and he writes in English. He is comparing Jewish law with other laws. You can understand why they are very suspicious of this young man. Although everyone accepts that he's a genius, but it is not enough to be a genius. So that's a big question, who to be in favor of. And the Zionists, the secular Zionists, were also very strong. Their political abilities were very strong. They were very much, as you can imagine, they were in favor of Rav Herzog because they figured out that he would be more liberal, he would be more understanding, he knew secular people, he knew non-Jews, he was not someone that was born and raised in Jerusalem in a bubble. So they hoped that by taking him, they would take in someone that would be much easier maybe to manipulate, and someone that would say yes, equal yes to everything they say. They would discover later that it's not going to be so simple. However, to his favor also played the fact that many of the old Yerushalmim were not really able to take a vote because they didn't register as part of Knesset Israel. That is, again, this is politics, but the British, maybe the most successful trick that the Zionist movement was able to perform was to convince the British that they are the authentic representatives of the Jewish nation. Now, were they chosen as, was there ever a vote in which the entire Jewish people voted the Zionist movement as the representative? It was never happened, of course. They played with congresses, but of course, to the congresses came the people that were part of the Zionist movement. However, because the British wanted to work with the Zionists, then if you wanted to have a vote, you needed to register with the Zionists. So many of the old Yerushalmians that didn't want to register with the Zionists didn't have a vote in the question who would become the chief rabbi. So to a strange extent, a paradoxical extent, there was a stronger voice to the non-Orthodox, to the secular, than to many of the Orthodox in the question who would become the chief rabbi. You understand the problems in such a system, but to a degree, that is a system that we have inherited to this very day, but that's beyond our scope. So, Rav Herzog was chosen, after all of that, as the chief rabbi of Eretz Israel, Ashkenazic rabbi, of course, and that was in 1936. And in 1937, he is coming, and by the force of his personality, he was very gentle. He was a British gentleman. So he was very gentle. He was able to win over many of his opponents who saw that he's an authentic Torah Jew. He is not someone that is trying just to be a doctor and play with Torah. He is a Torah man who is using also secular knowledge for the sake of Shamayim, for the sake of heaven. And when they saw that, many had been convinced, many did not. We shouldn't be confused. In some of the events that he was in, he was booed out. Everything that the Kanaim know how to do, fanatics know how to do, he saw it all. However, he was able to win over the main stream, even of the more right-wing element, we may say, of the Orthodox in Yerushalayim. Every Friday in his home, I don't know how these people have time on Friday, but every Friday in his home, they would have like a small Beit Midrash that all the Lamdanim of Yerushalayim, everyone that wants, can come in, and they would hold discussions about certain things. So Torah, Halacha, Pilpul. If you want, you can just come in, you'd be served tea and cookies, and which were, I guess, excellent, as you can understand, and speaking Torah. And speaking Torah. And it was known that all the Gdolim of Yerushalayim every Friday come to his home to speak in Torah, and that was part of his ability to build this consensus. Now, again, of course, some didn't come, but the mainstream was there. Now, these are extremely difficult times in Eretz Israel. In 1936, we have the Arab Revolt against the British, which leads, after pogroms and many deaths and terror, it leads to the British declaring on the Field Committee, which discussed the question of how the mandate should continue. And trying to squeeze very, very complicated issues into very short sentences, their decision was that the mandate is not really feasible anymore, which is to say, it is not profitable for the British anymore. So they want to throw this hot potato from their hands. However, of course, it is more important to keep good connections with the Arabs than with the Jews, for the simple reason that the Arabs control the oil, which now begins to be extremely important. Everyone understands that, while the Jews hold nothing, right? So the decision of this committee was, excuse me, that from what was supposed to be, the British got a mandate from the League of Nations to build a national home for the Jews. And for that, they received the western side of the Jordan and the eastern side of the Jordan, what is now called the Kingdom of Jordan. They decided that 7% of this area would be given to Jewish hands for Jewish state, 7%. 90% would be given to the Arabs, and about 5% would remain in British hands, and this is Yerushalayim and things that they saw as important that would remain in their hands. So that was the excellent decision that this committee came to. Also, until this would be performed, we should limit aliyah of Jews, because the aliyah of Jews is getting the Arabs angry, and that is something that is we don't want. So that was that. Now we speak about these decisions are being given in 1937, 1938. Everyone understands that Jews are not welcome in Europe anymore. They are looking where to run to. And if the British are limiting the ability to making aliyah, that is condemning people to death. And that's a stain on, I think, on the British Empire that they would never be able to remove. Because for no good reason, they prevented the Jews from being able to run to their own homeland. And they closed the gates. So he's trying to fight again together with the rest of the Jewish Ishuv settlement. However, when he publishes a karoz, a pashkevil, against, so of course, against the limiting of Aliyah, all the Jews were united. But he also opposed the partition, the splitting of the land. And that, when he published his formal opinion as the chief rabbi against that, he was told by the Jewish agency that basically in his role as a rabbi, he should limit himself to Basar Bechalav. And they are not interested in his political opinion. Now, he was still pretty young. He was also new in his role. He took a step back and took off the Pashkevila, this letter, this public letter that he sent. However, later he made another thought. And then he decided that, as a matter of fact, not only that he's rethinking his public opinion, he is rethinking his opinion. And he came to the conclusion that there is no halachic prohibition against the partition. Meaning, of course, as Jews, we want to have as much of Eretz Israel as we can. However, if someone else is taking from us, we do not necessarily have to disagree with accepting at least what we are being given. Also, he decided, so it's not an halachic question, it's a political question. And then he rethought his political position, and he decided that it is better to accept, also from the political point of view, it is better to accept the little that we are being given in order to, at least that in this little area of land, would be able to open the gates to as many Jews as we can, and would, the question of what would happen in the rest of the land, let's wait for a later, more quiet time. That was his thought. So what he really did, he changed his mind. from being against the partition. Not that he celebrated about the partition, of course not. But he decided that from the two alternatives, which is or nothing or a little, it is better a little in your hand than two birds on the tree. That was his decision. He also was against terror acts against the British, although he was extremely opposed to the way that the Mandat was behaving at the time. As I said, it was clear that they are just causing, they are letting Jews to die. However, he thought that no terror acts should be done in a way that would injure someone. And he based that not only, he based that on halachic considerations, on moral considerations, but also he said, I saw what happened in Ireland. That is not the way, that would completely destroy, it could destroy us, it would destroy them, it would destroy the land. So we need to go in the diplomatic route. That was his position. A very interesting one. And again, a position that didn't necessarily win him many friends in the religious circles. So, I'm again, these are very turbulent times, very interesting things. Every day something interesting happens. I'm trying just to give us a mirror into who Rav Herzog was as the chief rabbi in 1939, before the Second World War breaks. Here in Eretz Israel, in its height, the dispute between the revisionists led by Jabotinsky and the Mapainiks, we would say, led by Ben Gurion and Weizmann. And he sends a letter, an identical letter, to Weizmann and to Jabotinsky. Weizmann from the left and Jabotinsky from the right. And he is writing to them, I would quote a few sentences. I cannot stop myself. כי איככה אוכל וראיתי ברעה אשר תשיג את עמי. So he's quoting here from Megillat Esther. He says, how can I be quiet when I see the disaster before the war broke? But it was clear. The disaster that is coming upon us. How can I see the destruction of the Jewish nation in the bitter exile? And you, the leaders of our people, you are steeped in disputes, in internal fights, as this is the right time to these ideological fights about this system or that system. Should be more social, should be more capitalist, more democratic in that way, less democratic in the other way. It says, look around us, what is going on? This is the time to encompass everyone into one big camp and not to divide ourselves. You read that from what changed? Now, they both wrote back very respectful letters, but of course, the goal was not achieved. As always, the temporary peace between the Jews was only achieved when the enemy began to knock on, not only knock, on the doors. Rav Herzog, in May of 1939, just a few months, in September, the war would break out. In May, the British published another, what they call the White Book, in which they completely restricted. It is, you know, that's so difficult when you read it. In May of 1939, the British even restricted more the ability of Jews to make Aliyah. Rav Herzog gave a drasha in Yeshurun, in Yerushalayim. The shul stands to this day, as you know. And after he finished the drasha, he said they have no moral right, they have no legal right, they have no, of course, no Torah right. And so he ripped the White Book, the Sefer HaLavan, into two in an act of defiance. His son, Chaim Herzog, who would become and before he became a president, he was an ambassador in the UN. And when in the 70s there was a declaration of the UN that Zionism is a type of racism. So he stood in the UN and teared this decision, declaration, and he said, I am now repeating the act of my father. And just as back then, now we all know and identify that this white book was really, it was abhorrent, it was not a mistake, it was a sin, a crime. So this decision of yours is a crime, and in the end it would be retaken. And indeed, took decades, but the UN, at least this decision was taken. I guess that nowadays they would make it again, but back then it was, they stepped back. In the 1st of September 1939, Second World War breaks. Rav Herzog, because he has these international ties and connections, is in the front of the attempts to save Jews in Europe. Now, this is a memorial book for Rav Herzog. I also have a digital biography that I bought for the sake of this shiur and read. They have pages upon pages of his attempts, and there is a lot to speak about. However, unfortunately, as we know, while every Jew that he was able to save, of course, is olam umelo'o, it was a drop in the bucket to what was going on. That's the sad reality. And I can speak 2 or 3 shiurim about all the attempts, and some of them he was able to save here a Jew and there a Jew, and there are 20 Jews, but the whole thing in the end was really a drop in the bucket. In 1940, he is going to the US in order to raise funds, and to be able maybe again to save a few Jews. Also, he met with Roosevelt, trying to, of course, that's before the US even joined the war. So he tried at least to convince him to put his influence on some of the states to stand against the Germans, to not give the Jews. Roosevelt heard him, but remained very cold. That's what he writes. Remained very cold. And the Rabbanit, as I said, she took a diary. In her entry from that day of meeting with President Roosevelt, she writes, the president gave his hand to my husband. He promised that he would do everything for the Jews of Palestine. But I know that he also gave the same identical promise to Faisal. And as it seems, I am sorry to say, the president was not an honest man entirely. It's a very sharp remark. But the Jews were very disappointed with the inaction of the American government, obviously before entering the war, but even after entering the war. As you know, they refused to divert the planes in order to bomb the railways to Auschwitz, even when everyone already knew what was going on there. So, and planes were over the area. But they decided that the saving of the Jews does not worth even a few bombs just to throw on the railway in order to block the trains for continuing. That's, again, it's just what it is. There is no other way to present it. In 1941, he returns to Eretz Israel after basically a failure in his journey in America. He was accepted in respect. He was honored. He gave great drashot. He was not able to raise the funds, and he was not able to budge the president. So he returned very, very, very disappointed and bitter from this journey. And he said to one of his friends, and it was recorded, that if he was not a man with faith, then he would just crawl into his bed and not get out anymore. He decides to return to Eretz Israel, although he's being warned that the journey through the sea is extremely dangerous. And also, Rommel is in Egypt, and he may very well conquer Eretz Israel. And you know that the Jews here began to make plans to make their own metzada over the Carmel. That was the plan, that if Roman would enter into Eretz Israel, all the Jews who concentrate themselves in the mountains of the Carmel, they began to build fortresses there and would make a last stand. Rav Herzog said, so they asked Rav Herzog to remain in the United States till things would clear out. Rav Herzog said, I am not remaining here. I am going back. And he embarked on a ship and he went through Africa and into through the from I don't know if it's from where he came. I wrote it, but now I cannot see it. So he decides to come. He comes to Eretz Israel. Here in Eretz Israel, the British Naziv, the representative, the highest representative here, was called McMichael. He was, I don't know if he was really anti-Semitic or he was just in favor of the Arabs. Although there was a war, although news of the destruction of the Jews were coming in, he was he wouldn't budge. He wouldn't budge. Two very famous cases was the drowning of two big ships with Jews, the Pateria and the Struma, which came from Europe with Jews that were trying to save themselves. Well, we are in 1941. And they are trying to save themselves. And the British says, no, you are not coming into Palestine because the amount of certificates is over for the year. And so they told them maybe they would just accept them as temporary residents. No, because if we do that, then maybe they would run away and no Jew can enter, even not on temporary basis. So the Struma, just after, it was a very weak ship with more than 800 Jews on it, mostly from Romania. It just sank in the Black Sea. Almost everyone was killed. The Fateria was a ship, it was a British ship. It was a deportation ship that was supposed to take people that were already able, they came illegally into Eretz Israel, were caught, captured by the British, and they wanted to send them back on a British ship. So the Haganah planted explosive device in order to stop the ship from going. However, there was some mistake in the calculation of the amount of explosives, and that caused the whole ship to drown, and another 250 Jewish Ma'apilim were killed. So more than 1,000, just in a very short amount of time. It was extremely difficult for the Jews here in Eretz Israel. Rav Herzog made his best to try and convince. He had excellent English. He was a British gentleman. He was the last hope that he would be able to convince this McMichael to change his mind. But nothing helped. Nothing helped. 1943, the children of Taharan. So these are children that they were able to save them from the Nazis. They get to Taharan, which was held by the British back then, and from there to Eretz Israel. There was a big dispute about their education. Most of them came from observant homes. However, here in Eretz Israel, the Jewish agency that was ruled by seculars, basically, so they sent them to secular kibbutzim in order to make them into new Jews. Here in Eretz Israel, Tzabarim. Why do you need this old religion? Rav Herzog is trying to fight that, and there is an internal fight which, I don't know. For me, of course, Jewish education is, that's my life. That's what I'm doing. It's the most important. But the way I see it, he was not able to save the Jews that he wanted to save. And his energy was just, he was so frustrated. So he put a lot of energy into this question of the education of Yaldei Taharan. But in the end, we speak here about they were saved. We speak about the education of 100, again, extremely important. It's with no lighthead that I'm saying that. But so much energy was invested into this question while thousands of children were killed every day. Not miseducated, murdered in Europe. But there was nothing that he could do. He knew that very well what I'm saying, but there was nothing that he could do. 1944, he goes to Turkey. He's trying to save the Jews of the Balkan, Hungary, Romania. 1944. He is making contact with the Pope, Pius XII, if I may, Yimach Shemo. And he refuses. He refuses to make any public announcement that Christian should save Jews. Why? He says that if you make such an announcement, you would jeopardize the welfare of the priests. And maybe even some of them are already hiding Jews, so that in the end, it was all for the sake of the Jews. So he would not risk the Jews. And that's, again, that's the world that we live. It's very important not to forget the world in which we live. And human nature does not change. It is what it is. So, 1945, again, there is a lot to speak about. There is a lot of effort, but very few fruits that we can point to. 1945, the end of the Second World War, and a few months later, Rav Herzog is in a journey in Europe in order to save Jewish children that were given to Christian families or to monasteries. And he's walking around, and there is a beautiful story. It is a legendary story, but it's a beautiful story about him coming to a certain Migzar monastery, and he's asking to be given back the Jews. And the father there, or the mother, or whoever was in charge, told him, we don't have any Jews here. He said, no, we don't have any Jews. He says, I would only come for a few minutes to supper time. And I would ask, just come on, please, come. The small children, she was sure that after 4 or 5 years, they would remember nothing. And he comes in, and he begins the pasuk of Shema Israel. He says, Shema Israel. And suddenly dozens of children stand up, and they finish the pasuk because they remember their parents saying the Shema Israel with them every night before bed. How many children didn't know the pasuk because the parents didn't recite it with them, or they were too young, or they didn't? How many children, after all of the Holocaust, how many children remain in this type of? We would never know. We would never know. But he was able to save more than 500 children. Going around, some places they were cooperative, some places they were not, and some places they had to kidnap. Not he himself, but there was a company with him, and he is able to save more than 500 children that he is sending with a train that was called the Herzog Children Train to Eretz Israel. And to this day, there are people here that are the children and the grandchildren of these children that were saved by Rav Herzog. We have so much to speak, but our time is up, and there is still the whole of the establishment of Medinat Israel. But that would be for the next time. I would only finish with one story that I saw in Gaza in the war. So you know that unfortunately, 3 of the hostages that tried to run away were killed. And after that, every time there was a movement or a suspicious noise, we were in a big question. Should we shoot? Maybe it's our own people. And one night, there was something that I don't think I'd ever forget. There was, again, some noise from a house, destroyed house nearby. And we woke up in the middle of the night, and we ran to there. And the Mempei, the company commander, stood outside of this house, and he shouted the first 2 words of the Shema Israel to see if there would be a response. I don't know if he knew the story about Rav Herzog, if he reinvented the wheel, but that was the way in which he tried to reconnect, to make this connection. In the end, it seems that it was only rubbers there, only stones. But that was a very strong picture. So with that, we finish for now. We did not finish this journey. It's a very long journey from Lomge, Ireland, England, Paris, Eretz Israel, Europe, and back to Eretz Israel, because we still have the establishment of Medinat Israel. That dream is going to come true, but the question is what nature, what color this dream would take, and that is Bezrat Hashem for next time.